Hello viewers, welcome to Kids Auto and Truck Repair. Today we have a 2005 Toyota Solara with a 3.3 liter engine. The customer complaint on this vehicle is the vehicle does not upshift. I believe it doesn't shift from second gear to third gear. Now I have to mention that this vehicle came from another shop. A friend of mine here in the area received this vehicle at his shop. The customer brought it to his shop for transmission issues. He looked at the transmission. He noticed that the oil pan of the transmission had a dent. So he replaced the transmission oil pan and the transmission filter and transmission fluid. After that, the issue was not fixed. The vehicle was still not shifting well. So he called me and asked if I could look at it for him. So this came from a friend of mine. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go in the vehicle so we can confirm the customer's complaint. The check engine light is on the dash. After that, we're going to connect a scan tool to the vehicle so we can scan the engine computer. Now, before we go in the vehicle, I also wanna mention that behind the camera, we have Matt holding the camera today. So Matt, thank you for being here with us. And thank you for all your awesome work you're doing behind the camera. So now, let's go in the vehicle so we can confirm the customer's complaint. So right there, as you can hear, the engine is running and the check engine light remains on the dash. So customer's complaint confirmed. The check engine light is on the dash, the VSC light is on, and the truck off light is on. So now I'm gonna turn off the engine. I'm gonna turn the key on. I have my scan tool dongle connected to the vehicle. So now we're gonna bring up our scan tool so we can scan the engine computer. All right, so now we're gonna go to scanner so we can scan the engine computer. So this is a Toyota. We're gonna find Toyota right there. So we're gonna do a code scan. This is gonna scan all the control units on the vehicle. The scan tool has identified the vehicle, 2005 Toyota Solara with a 3.3 liter. So everything looks good. We're gonna click OK. We're gonna do a code scan. So right off the bat, we have one trouble code in the engine computer. The code is P0766. It says shift solenoid D performance / stuck off. So it looks like there is something going on with the shift solenoid D. So this solenoid is stuck off. We have the same code in the transmission control unit. Okay, so we have all these codes saved in the engine computer, so that's good. We have this code in the engine computer. We also have it in the transmission control unit. So same code, P0766. Now, when my buddy dropped off this car at our shop, he told me that the vehicle is not going into third gear. I think he said third gear or fourth gear. So there's one gear where the transmission is not going into. Okay, and of course this code is going to cause that. Okay, so as you can see, this is the only code we have in pretty much most of these control units here. Okay, we have one code here in the occupant classification control unit, B1795. Okay, so no code in the generic side of the tool. We are going to focus on this code over here, P0766. This is the code that's causing the check engine light to remain on the dash. And this is the code that's preventing this transmission to shift into third gear. So I'm going to click on engine. So now we're going to go into the engine computer. As you can see, we're going to have the same code here too. I'm just double checking to make sure that this is the only code we have in the engine computer. So right there, same code. So let's back out. Let's see if we have the troubleshooter here so we can look up this code. I'm not really familiar with this code, so we're going to have to familiarize ourselves with this code, which means we have to read about it. Let me look at this code one more time. Okay, So P0766. Now we know this is a transmission code, but if there was no code description, when you see 7 after P0, it is a transmission code. So that means this is a transmission code. So we know that. So P0766. So let's go to troubleshooter and read up about this code tips. So let's go to P0. It was P0766. So right here, P07, transmission control. Right here, P0766. So we're gonna read up about this code to familiarize ourselves about this. P0766 is defined as pressure control solenoid D performance fault, shift control valve S4 malfunction. Code sets when actual gear does not match gear commanded by PCM. So basically this code sets when there's a discrepancy between the gear that the transmission is in and the gear that the engine computer wants it to be in. Okay, so if the transmission is stuck in one particular gear but the engine computer wants it to be in a second or a different gear, then this code will be set. So that's good to know. And then it says possible stuck, open or closed D shift solenoid S4, stuck or plugged valve body, or slipping or damaged trans component. So this can be caused by a defective solenoid, okay, or a transmission that's going bad, or slipping transmission clutches. So that's good to know right there. Remove solenoid and measure resistance across terminals. Should be about 11 ohms to 15 ohms at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So we can do a resistance measurement of this solenoid to see if it's good, and then used compressed air about 71 psi to check for proper shift solenoid operation with battery positive applied through, I guess, 23 watt bulb. Shift solenoid should be open and exhausting compressed air. With no voltage, solenoid should be closed, no air. Replace solenoid if stuck or plugged. So we all know how solenoids work. You know, solenoids get energized and then they open and close. Some of them are closed solenoid. When they get energized, they open, so vice versa. Now, what I want to do now is, I mean, the ohm test might be the easiest test to do. So let's back out of here. And I want to go into the transmission control unit. Okay, so we've read about this code. Let's see if we can go into the TCM. Let's go into the transmission control unit. Okay, let's go to data display. Let's see if we have a resistance data PID of all the shift solenoids in the transmission. Now this car has 130,000 miles, so 130,162. So the car doesn't have a lot of miles. So if it had over 200,000 miles, I was gonna say maybe the transmission is faulty or going bad, but 130,000 miles for a Toyota is not a lot. Let's see what we got on the transmission. We got the engine speed data PID, shift solenoid. So we do not have resistance data PIDs in the transmission control unit. Okay, let's back out. Now let's see if we have some tests here, because the solenoid could be stuck like the code description said, or we can have a problem in the solenoid wiring. So let's go to actuator test. Line up solenoid on and off, pressure up solenoid, lock up solenoid. There's no solenoid D, because right now what I want to do is I would like to see if we have a bidirectional test to turn the solenoid on and off to see if we can hear it click or not. This is not what we need to do. Let's go to shift. Let's see what we have there. No. Okay, so what I'm looking for is, I thought we were gonna have a list of solenoids, like solenoid A, B, C, D, for example. And then I was going to try to turn on solenoid D, because that's the one that's throwing a trouble code. I was going to try to turn it on to see if we were going to hear it click under the hood. So I'm going to back out. Let's go to codes again. I'm sure this is a hard fault. I'm going to try to clear this code, and then we're going to see if the code is going to come back. Okay, so here's our current code. So P0766. Let's back out. I'm going to clear it. Let's see if it's going to go away. It probably won't. I just want to see what's going to happen. Okay, we have erased the code. Let's read the codes again. Current code, so no codes. I'm going to start the engine. So right now the check engine light is off. So let's go on a quick test drive. Let's drive around the shop. Let's see if this code is going to come back on right away. Okay. So the check engine light is still off. Hopefully this code is going to come back pretty fast, but if it doesn't come back, it's fine. I don't want to go too far because we have a couple projects that we have to work on today. So far so good. The transmission is shifting. I mean, the transmission seems to shift fine. I should have looked at freeze frame data to see at what speed or what engine RPMs and what vehicle speed this trouble code set. Let's just go around that roundabout up there and then come back. If the code doesn't come back, when we get back to the shop, I'm gonna look up the transmission wiring diagram so I can figure out the wiring of that solenoid, and then we will do a resistance test of the D solenoid to see if the resistance is out of spec. If the D solenoid resistance is out of spec, you know, then that solenoid would have to be replaced. Now, I know I don't like to do the resistance test because the resistance measurement test sometimes is not too accurate, but we'll see. I mean, this thing is, I don't know, it drives well. I mean, we're also not driving too fast right now, so. All right, guys, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm going to drive back to the shop. The check engine light is not on right now, so the check engine light didn't come back on. I'm gonna drive back to the shop. If the check engine light comes on, I'm gonna bring you guys back up to show you the check engine light and the code again. I'm sure the same code might come back, but if the code doesn't come back, I am going to look at the transmission wiring diagram once I get to the shop. We're gonna figure out how the solenoid D is wired, and then we will get to the wiring of the solenoid. We will do some testing at the solenoid wire, and then that will determine our next step. All right, guys, we are back in the shop. I did do some things off camera. I removed the air filter box. I also removed the battery so we can get access to the wiring of the solenoid D on the transmission. So I think it's shift solenoid D. They also call it S4 solenoid. So we're gonna get access to the solenoid wiring at the transmission electrical connector so we can do some tests at the transmission electrical connector. So let's see if this solenoid is open, or maybe there is high resistance on this solenoid. So I'm gonna bring you here under the hood. So Matt, if you can show everyone this electrical connector here. Yeah, so right here, this guy, I'm gonna disconnect it. So this is the transmission electrical connector, this guy. Now, I already looked at the service info off camera. The solenoid D is grounded through the transmission case, and it gets power through this blue wire. So we're gonna back probe this blue wire so we can do our testing at this electrical connector. But before we do that, I wanna show you the wiring diagram first. So let's go to our service info so we can look at the wiring diagram. So here's what I did off camera. I read about this trouble code a little bit more. So as you can see, we have our trouble code here, P0766, shift solenoid D performance, shift solenoid valve S4. Now, I read this. I mean, if you guys want to read about this, you can pause the video and read more about this. I'm going to click on this over here. So here it says that, I mean, we already read about this on the troubleshooter on the snap-on scan tool. So trouble area, shift solenoid valve S4 remains open or closed, valve body is blocked. So this code can be caused by a defective solenoid or a blocked valve body, shift solenoid valve, automatic transmission, clutch brake, or gear. So there are a lot of things that can cause this trouble code to be set. So the valve is one of them, the valve body. We can have a sticking spool valve in the valve body. So we have to do some tests to determine what's causing this code to be set. So let's back out. Let's scroll down. I mean, there's a lot to read about this. We're gonna scroll down and see what other tests we can do on this solenoid. So right here, I'm gonna click on this. So this is the solenoid, and this solenoid is inside the transmission. So we can send power and ground to this solenoid to see if it's gonna click, or we can do a resistance test of the solenoid. So this is a one-wire solenoid. It's grounded through this bracket over here on the case of the transmission. We're gonna go and use our ohm meter to ohm test this solenoid. Now, the resistance spec of this solenoid is over here. So our specification of this solenoid should be between 11 and 15 ohms. Outside is not 68 degrees, but we should be within 10 and 15 ohms when we test this solenoid. So now let's go back under the hood so we can do some tests at the solenoid. Actually, we won't be able to get to the solenoid because the solenoid is in the transmission, but we can do our test at the transmission wiring. So now what I'm gonna do is we're gonna find our wiring diagram. We're gonna find our valve body. So here's our valve body in the transmission. Okay, so this over here is the valve body. As you can see, it says electronically controlled transmission solenoid. So this is inside the transmission, and this over here is the engine computer. Now, if you look over here on the engine computer, we have S4. So this is the solenoid that's giving us trouble. So I'm gonna highlight this wire. And if we follow this wire, it goes to this solenoid over here. So this is S4 solenoid or D solenoid. And as you can see up here, this solenoid is grounded through the transmission case. So if we grab our multimeter and set it up on the resistance scale and connect to this blue wire, and then the other lead of the multimeter is going to go to transmission ground, okay, or a bolt that's bolted to the transmission, we should read the resistance of this solenoid if this solenoid is not open, okay? Now, if you look at this connector here, all these wires are on the electrical connector of the transmission. Now, if you look at all these wires, there is only one solid blue wire on this connector. So, okay, if you look at all these wires, we have yellow and red, yellow and black, brown, green, green and red, green and black, red and black, okay, black and white, blue and yellow, blue and red. So there's only one solid blue wire on this connector. This one is gray and this one is yellow. So this solid blue wire on the transmission electrical connector is the wire for the S4 shift solenoid. Now let's go under the hood so we can do our test at this solid blue wire. Before we go under the hood and test the S4 solenoid, I want to show you the oil pan that my buddy replaced. So this is the transmission oil pan. As you can see, it looks new. So he told me he replaced the transmission oil pan and the transmission filter. If the issue is the solenoid or the valve body, all of this needs to come up. So my friend just wants me to figure out the issue so I can tell him what's wrong with this, and he's gonna do the work. So, I mean, we're down to our last test. Let's see if this solenoid is open. If the solenoid is open, the valve body needs to come off so that the solenoid can be replaced. But if the solenoid is not open, the issue could be a dirty valve body or a sticking spool valve in the valve body. So let's go under the hood so we can do our last test. So now we're gonna find our solid blue wire on this electrical connector. So once again, this is the transmission electrical connector. So I'm looking at the pins over here. Everything looks good. So I am going to back probe this blue wire. So it looks like this is our solid blue wire. And remember, that's the only solid blue wire we have on this electrical connector. So this is the wire. I'm gonna carefully back probe it, just like that. And then I am going to reconnect the electrical connector to the transmission. Okay, perfect. So now I'm gonna grab my multimeter. We're gonna turn it on and set it up to the resistance scale. Okay, so I'm gonna put the multimeter right here. Now, since the S4 solenoid is grounded through the transmission case, we are going to connect this alligator clamp to one of the bolts around the transmission. So I'm just gonna connect this to the starter bolt. So the starter bolt goes through the transmission, so that's a ground right there. Now we're gonna connect this red test lead to our backing probe tool that's going to the S4 solenoid wire. Let's look at the multimeter. So what do we have? We have 12.7 ohms. So 12.7 ohms is within our solenoid specification. Remember, the spec was between 11 and 15 ohms. So 12.7 ohms is within spec. So based on the results that we have here on the multimeter screen, this tells me that the solenoid is good. Now, the resistance is within spec, so our solenoid is not open. The solenoid is most likely good. This test is not a 100% accurate test because the resistance can change based on the temperature of the transmission. So now this test tells us that the solenoid is not open. So now what I want to do next is I would like to get my multimeter out of the way. I'm going to disconnect this. So we know our S4 solenoid has a resistance of 12.7 ohms. So now I am going to bring the car battery here. Okay, let's bring the battery back on the car. And I'm gonna send power to the solenoid wire to see if the solenoid is gonna click. If the solenoid is good, when we send power to it, it should click, and I hope it's gonna be loud enough. So I'm gonna connect my jumper wire to our back probing tool. Okay, so we have this black jumper wire connected to our back probing tool that's connected to the blue wire that goes to solenoid 4. So here's my mic. I'm gonna try to bring my mic down here so you can hear it. Hopefully this solenoid is going to click. So now, if the solenoid is good, when I send power to it, it should click. Can you hear it? I don't know if the mic is picking this up, but when I send power to the solenoid, I can hear it click inside the transmission. So I hope that was loud enough. I hope you heard it. We measured the resistance of the solenoid. The solenoid has about 12.4 ohms of resistance, and when we send power down to the solenoid wire, we can hear the solenoid click. So that tells me that the solenoid is most likely good. I'm saying most likely good is because the solenoid can still click, but it may not close or open all the way. Or we could also have a stuck spool valve in the valve body. We can have a dirty transmission filter. Although the transmission filter was replaced and the oil pan was replaced too, the issue could be in the valve body. Now, since this vehicle came from a friend's shop, I'm gonna tell my friend to either remove the valve body and inspect it, or replace the transmission. The other test that I want to do before we wrap up this video, because at this point the issue is inside the transmission, okay? So from the outside connector to the valves and shift solenoids inside the transmission, we can already say that the wiring is good, okay? So the wiring of the solenoids inside the transmission is good because we heard it click, but the wiring from the transmission to the engine computer could be open. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna connect my RTL scan tool to the vehicle. I'm gonna try to turn on the S4 solenoid to see if the engine computer is sending power to the S4 solenoid to turn it on, okay? Now we're gonna use a test light to see if the power that's coming from the engine computer is making it to the S4 solenoid. So now what I'm gonna do is, let's make sure the wiring from the transmission to the engine computer is good, and after that we're gonna wrap up this video. I'm gonna get my RTL scan tool connected to the vehicle, and then I will bring you guys back up. I got my RTL scan tool connected to the vehicle. So now we're gonna go under the hood so we can do our last test. The key is on in the vehicle. I'm gonna put my scan tool right here. We're gonna use a test light to make sure that the engine computer is turning on the S4 solenoid. So I'm gonna connect my test light to ground. Now if I touch power, the test light is gonna light. As you can see, test light lights, so our test light is good. Now I'm gonna connect my test light to the back probing tool that's connected to the blue wire that comes from the S4 solenoid. Okay, so now since the key is on in the vehicle, I'm gonna go inside the engine computer. So we're gonna go to active test. We're gonna go to shift gear. So now we're testing the circuit between the transmission and the engine computer. So we're gonna go to all data. Okay, so we have first gear, second, third, fourth, and fifth. I believe the power will go to S4 solenoid when we click on fifth gear. So I'm gonna click on first. Now I also want you to watch the test light here. I want you guys to watch the test light as I'm turning the solenoids inside the transmission on. So let's go to third. Okay, I heard a click, fourth, and then fifth. Can you see the test light come on? I'm gonna go to fourth. Test light is gonna go off. Okay, so I'm gonna turn this on. So watch the test light. So that's on, off, on, off. So our test light comes on, so that's good. All right, so we're good to go. The fact that the test light comes on, that tells us that the circuit of the S4 solenoid from the transmission to the engine computer is good, because we were able to turn on the solenoid with the scan tool. So the wiring of the solenoid is good all the way up to the engine computer. So everything should be working right now. So the fact that this vehicle is not going into third gear and fifth gear, this tells me that the issue is inside the transmission. Everything else outside of the transmission is good. So we could have a spool valve that's sticking inside the valve body. We can have a dirty valve body. So we're gonna leave this right over here. I'm gonna call my friend and tell him what we found. It's not a wiring issue. You know, it's not a computer issue. The driver inside the computer is turning on the solenoid. So if this code keeps coming back, the issue is in the transmission. So he's gonna have to either remove the valve body and figure out what's going on, or replace the transmission. So I am going to get all these tools out of the way, and then that's it. So we can wrap up this video. What do you think, Matt? Are we done? Yeah? Okay. So cameraman Matt behind the camera says, okay, we should get you a mic so you can, you know, so you can say something. All right, guys. So we're gonna leave this right over here. This was a pretty, you know, quick and easy one. It took us a little while to get to service info because our Wi-Fi is kind of not working well here today. We have internet connection issue in the shop, but we are done with our diagnosis. The S4 wiring is good. The transmission control unit, the engine control unit, which also houses the transmission control unit, is controlling and turning on the S4 solenoid. So all is well. The issue is inside the transmission. Now I'm gonna call my friend so he can come pick up this car. So we are done with the diagnosis. He will do the rest. So I don't know if he's gonna replace the transmission or maybe he's just gonna get a new valve body for this. So I'm gonna leave this right over here. I hope you like the video. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why so we can make better videos in the future. Once again, we have Matt here with us. You know, I loved all the comments that you guys wrote last time about Matt. So Matt read the comments, he was so happy. Again, if you have anything to say about me or Matt, let us know in the comments. And once again, if you have any concerns, criticism, leave them in the comment box. Thanks for watching. See you next time.